Happy Moon Day, Collective. Hope everyone's week has gotten off to a decent start. I'll start off with the good things because I feel like I really had to reach today. I'm not gonna lie. This is my Swiss chard harvest from today, and I gotta say, this brings me a lot of joy. Aside from the fact it's going to be like 29 tonight, and I figured practically I need to go ahead and get these cut. This is just actually a really nice looking batch of Swiss chard. And last time you guys saw me prepare it, I was making a chicken soup. I'm going to be doing the same thing this time. I think I'm going to make a more traditional chicken noodle soup, the ultimate comfort, self-nurturing food. So I will be preparing this lovely Swiss chard. And the colors, of course, are enough to brighten my spirits on this full moon Monday. Aside from today being ruled by the moon, as you guys have probably caught on to at this point, we've got a full moon in Gemini. Now, it was at its peak at like a little after 4 a.m. today, so it is kind of like the energy of the full moon is kind of dissipating, albeit not quickly enough. But the full moon in Gemini this time felt, I'm not gonna lie, it felt kind of raggedy. I had therapy today, and as I've said, Mondays are generally a very good time for therapy, and it was. But I have to say, after therapy, and it was productive. Like I was like, I have some things to talk about this time. And a lot of it was sort of like recounting like how the holiday went and like how it was good and it was smooth and like enjoyable, and how there were a lot of like kind of unexpected emotions that came with that, because it forced me to recount like last year and then like the year before that, in times to where it felt like, I was forced to kind of sit there and think, why did it have to be so hard those times? Like, here I am managing all this by myself this year. And, I think if there were any emotions that were to take over this year, I think the ones that I would have predicted would come up or bubble up to the surface weren't actually the ones. And so there was like good and bad to that. It was like, oh, well, on the one hand, this wasn't like the thing creeping up and haunting me on my first Thanksgiving, after the chaotic breakup, but it was more so just kind of shaking my head and going, why did it have to be like that all those years? And like, so I talked that out in therapy, so I'm not gonna go there on this video. But after therapy today, I just really felt like going like nonverbal for like the week. It was just, I don't know. It's strange because Gemini is a very a natal moon in Gemini. So if you're born with your moon in Gemini, your sort of like a preferred way of going about things in terms of like nurturing your moon style and love language is like is communicative. It's very like Mercury rules Gemini, and Mercury is very, engage your brain, engage your thoughts, engage your words. And so when you put the moon there, air moon, sort of like uh engaging your mind with like communication and reading and learning and all that, like taking in information and communicating it, that would be natural to a moon placement in Gemini. But it's not always quite that way in terms of the transits. So we've got the today, like I said, we had the full moon in Gemini, and I will say it's mostly because of the aspects that it was making to other planets. So that's often where, in isolation, you can attach certain qualities to like someone born with their moon sign in Gemini. But when you add in like the surrounding factors in terms of a transit that we're all experiencing right now, that can read quite differently. Sometimes like an aspect that the moon is making can tend to like override or overshadow, I might say, some of the qualities that you would otherwise attach to just talking about what a Gemini moon, the archetype surrounding that. So this particular Gemini moon, so in case anyone doesn't know, a full moon is when on a chart you can see when someone was born under a full moon, because that would put the sun and the moon directly across from one another, like in a face-off, like 180 degrees away. You're going to have the full moon, for example, today occurred at I want to say 4 degrees of Gemini, and so that would have meant that at the exact same time the sun was at 4 degrees of Sagittarius, exactly the sister sign on the opposite side of the wheel. So that's what it looks like in a chart. And that a full moon generally represents like the culmination point, like the buildup of all the energy of the moon cycle, you know, from the new moon building all the way up. It's at like max energy, and that's often where you know, hospitals will say like lots of babies are born on full moons, or you know, sort of this kind of peak point of energy that has been built up in the time since the new moon. And you see it with the tides and like all kinds of autonomic cycles. But I have to say the loudest parts of this particular Gemini full moon were was the opposition in the sky to Mars. So like I said, it was directly opposite the sun, but Mars and the sun happen to be kind of sitting right there side by side at the beginning of Sagittarius. So you've got anytime the Mars, the planet of like aggression, action, fire, uh, passion, war, sometimes is having this standoff in opposition to Mother Moon, you know, the nurturing, the like picture, you know, sitting by the fire with like someone serving you some homemade chicken noodle soup and like, you know, your most comfortable blanket and your childhood comfort show on TV, and you know, being served a hot beverage. The Mother Moon is nurturing, and so the opposition to Mars is already sort of like well, you notice it. And then in terms of what's known as an extremely challenging aspect, a square, which you can see in the sky, is meaning it literally would form a square. So it would be like Gemini, and then you would go to Pisces. So it's Gemini is a mutable air sign, Pisces is a mutable water sign. Anytime you have like a planet at the beginning of degrees of a mutable sign and then at the beginning degrees of another mutable sign, those would be forming square aspects to one another. So just suffice it to say, when you have what I just said about the moon, the Mars opposing the moon, that challenge, and then the challenge of the moon also forming a square to Saturn and Pisces, which we've talked about in a lot of other videos, and Saturn doesn't move very quickly. So it's been sort of stationed there at 0 degrees of Pisces, just hovering right there. It was making a square to the moon, and so that sort of has a way of feeling like a vice, almost sort of like you have all the softness of the moon and the energies, but then it's like whatever challenging aspects that those archetypes of, you know, the moon and Gemini with the opposition to Mars, you know, Saturn, it's going to sort of like bring to the surface any challenging things that sort of need to be addressed, that perhaps have been like bubbling maybe beneath the surface for a while. Anything that you've, in other words, tried to suppress and kick the can down the road for. Saturn making a difficult aspect is always going to make you very aware of those things and definitely create that discomfort within you. And then, like I've also said, is when it comes to discomfort being created as a result of these challenging aspects, these tensions, it's your invitation to sort of like um, alleviate the discomfort. And you know how you do that? By addressing what's causing the discomfort. And that's like, they're like, no, we don't want to do that. We want to kick the can down the road. But Saturn has a way of reminding you that the bill always comes due. So here we are. And so imagine what the energy of the Gemini full moon, with thoughts and like, a lot of times too many thoughts, racing thoughts, a lot of things surfacing that you might have preferred to like not really think about. Saturn's gonna, with that uncomfortable square aspect, gonna make you wish that maybe you hadn't suppressed those things down. Maybe make you wish that you hadn't kicked the can down the road. And so that brings me to the most obvious tarot card that I figured no better time to introduce the moon card, number 18 of the major arcana, than today. Because anyone that's watched What's the High Priestess Trying to Tell You, that video, the fireside reflection video, there's going to be a lot of similarities like that you might hear ringing true. But the moon is it's a number 9, and that's because it's 18. You add 8 and 1, and that means it's closely related to the Hermit card, which I've addressed in a video, which is Major Arcana number 9. And when I kind of fill in the details of what the moon sort of invites you to do when it comes up in a reading, you can see how it is a natural mate of the Hermit card. So the moon, the moon is associated, bringing it back around to the astrology and the current transits now, the moon is associated with the sign of Pisces. Now, some readers also like to throw Cancer in there because, of course, like I've mentioned before, Cancer's ruling planet is the moon. And there's only 2 signs that have the luminaries as their ruling planet. You've got Cancer that has the moon as its ruler, and then Leo that has the sun as its ruler. And then all the other signs also have planetary rulers, but none of them are the luminaries. So Cancer has that special distinction in terms of being ruled by the moon. And so while it is associated with Piscean energy, specifically because the keywords when the moon card comes up in tarot, the primary words that come to mind are fantasy, illusion, bewilderment, sometimes fear, because of that kind of being a natural reaction to the other words that I've mentioned. We don't like what's hidden. We don't like the unknown. So Piscean energy, dreamy, sort of like a liminal, that's fun until it's not. It's fun when it's like low stakes and you're detached and say you're like floating around in the dream world, but a sense of bewilderment and illusion in your waking state is frightening. And unless, of course, you are actively seeking that state, by way of escapism and substances, people, whatever vices. And then when something happens where you're forced to sort of like become disillusioned and like snap out of it, that probably brings about a sense of fear in somebody. So when the moon card comes up, you are essentially asked to look around in your life using your intuition, using your right brain, that sort of gut feeling. You're asked to assess what might not be quite as it seems. What is it that might be sort of hiding behind some sort of veil of like some smoke filter, or what smoke screens might be there in your life, either created by others around you, Are there other people that aren't quite what they seem, or is it you? Is it your own thoughts that are actually clouding the way things actually are? And that can be its own mental turmoil, because a lot of us are, we grow into these patterns, like survival patterns, and we kind of grow accustomed to like avoiding that question, right? So this is a card of intuition, first and foremost, like, but using your intuition to really ask yourself, what is it that doesn't seem quite right? Like, why is it that when that certain person comes around, it's just like something I can't quite put my finger on? Or why is it that, this one opportunity, it's like, it sounds sort of like it sounds too good to be true. And we've all heard the age old saying, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. And, I don't want to sound like the old nagging pessimist, because some things sound too good to be true simply because we've told ourselves that we don't deserve those things. And in fact, they are that good. Like, I'm very pro give yourself permission to like see a good thing for what it is and to not talk yourself out of like going for it. But um you often know the difference between that. Like that kind of puts you in a different state than that sort of there's this kind of gut feeling I have. I can't put my finger on it. This offer seems a little bit too good to be true. And we all know that feeling. We've all been there. Sort of like you're scrolling on your phone and or opening your email and you see something and you're like, the quickest way to identify this as spam is because this is a patently ridiculous like thing that they're saying. It's like, oh, just click this and you've won like $500,000, whatever. That is very much the sounds too good to be true, because it is. And so I guess instead of like using, in those moments, we're using our rational mind to make that assessment. But the moon card is asking you to use your intuition to make those assessments. And again, this is a skill that I find that takes a little bit of cultivating. And in a world to where there's so many distractions, there's so much input, it can be hard to really make sure that you have a good relationship, a good working relationship with your intuition, that inner voice. And sometimes, I've been there personally. It often comes when, like, say you haven't gone on a walk for a while, or, you're like, I'm going to go out and go to a public park and walk. One of the reasons it feels so good, and you kind of come back going, man, I really need to do that like a lot, because it's sort of that occasional reminder, like, hey, look at how sharp your mind is when there's no like bombardment from like several different screens and like several different people like giving their input. And there's a lot of noise that like modern life just sort of imposes upon us, even when we are seeking to be mindful, like in whatever ways we can. So this moon card, I'm going to talk about the symbolism for a minute, and it's a very rich card. Like, it's funny because like when I talk about astrologers and I talk about tarot readers, it's not unlike the way I would talk about lawyers for, say, a case, what we'd call a case of first impression. So a case that would be like a set of circumstances in a potential like case to where it's no clear cut there's no clear cut answer in the statute, or there's no clear cut sort of like case law. It's a unique set of circumstances and someone's walking in your office as a potential client, and you're kind of assessing as a lawyer like what you might do with that circumstance. And then that same person goes to another lawyer's office, and what that other lawyer says going to have like some of the core similarities, but like it being a case of first impression, sort of like this novel set of facts. No two lawyers, in other words, are going to have the exact same answer. They're going to be flavors of all like the core elements, but the way one lawyer is going to interpret it is going to be unique to that lawyer's perspective and life experience. And that's going to be the exact same sort of analysis I would give to a tarot reader or to an astrologer looking at the same chart and the same spread of cards. So I find that that's a really helpful thing, and it can be, there is a sort of like a responsibility placed on the user or on the potential client that I think goes without saying, but I do think it's warranted to point out that the lawyer is only going to do the best they can with like a novel situation, using all the skills that they have, and there's going to be a lot that's going to depend on it. You don't know ultimately what judge you're going to get, and like what how it's going to land, and like if you go to trial, you get a certain set of jurors, and like the way they see it might be one way, and despite you really believing that the way you see it is actually like the more fair, like I guess settled in law that is their sort of perspective. But again, there's so many variables, and there are no guarantees. A lawyer can say, well, I would gauge based on my experience, this is the level of success, and therefore I will or will not take this case. But there are no guarantees. And so that requires a bit of like understanding and assuming the risk right along with the lawyer, if you're the person with this case, and sort of taking a chance on the unknown. And that is what I would say to anybody who is navigating the world of astrology and or tarot for the first time. Somebody commented the other day, I'm actually glad that they did. And so if you're watching, I'm going to address this because I thought that it was something that like everyone should hear. Is somebody had commented that they remarked how they found that watching tarot readings can get addicting. And I'm glad that they said that, because that is true. One, for many different reasons. Like, one, it's fascinating. Like, so if you are trying to learn and you're just kind of taking it in, you're a very mercurial person. That was me. Whatever thing, new subject matter I'm trying to take in, I can get addicted to it because I'm just like, I want to consume the information. I want to consume, and kind of run it through the filter. The more data I take in, the more my mind that works in its own way starts to synthesize and come up, see new connections. So it's like my like thirst, almost insatiable thirst for like pattern recognition, and like detecting like sort of intersections of seemingly disparate subject matters, that makes me, when I embark in like a new subject, I just want to take it in. So in that way, it can be addicting for me. But it's like any addiction. Like the mindfulness is sort of like what is your like your safeguard, so to speak. It's sort of like, it's hard to become fully addicted to something when you're consciously aware of like how addicting it can be. When you're working with that as a working truth. But then there's another sort of like, I think more important to point out way it can be addicting. And that's if you are yourself sort of like suffering, and if you are sort of just like looking for some sort of guidance, some sort of answer, some sort of like meaning in something that's happened in your life that has left you in despair, in emotional turmoil, in sort of not knowing what to do next. And I have a lot of compassion for those people, because there's a lot of people out there on the internet that are aware of a collective sense of despair and loneliness and a desperation, sort of like the people that are like peddling miracle weight loss things. It's another thing you can hone in on if you're like looking to make money or gain following, and you really want to assess like collectively, what are the patterns of like, what do people find themselves most desperately wanting in this certain group, like especially like Americans. And you might detect like weight loss, like desperation to like stay young looking and stay beautiful looking and lose weight and like that sort of market. So then there's all kinds of people like they're gonna peddle whatever because someone desperately seeking and they see this new thing, they're like, oh, like take my money, shut up and take my money. And so the same goes with people when it comes to like I don't even want to say preying upon, because it's like, yeah, there are those people, but sometimes just like a detached person just looking to make money might just go, well, look at one thing I'll never run out of on the internet is like a population of people heartbroken and looking for answers. And so, you know, there might be certain outlets, tarot or not, that are promising some sort of answer that like nobody is capable of giving. I mean, I think that any sort of system or practice in divination or sort of self-reflection is only as useful as like the willingness of the person, approaching it for the first time, the willingness of them to sort of temper their expectations with the reality of like what this is, of what is being presented. And first and foremost, I hope that it presents in the way that I am presenting it, as like a tool for self-reflection and for kind of stepping way back, like sort of looking at yourself, getting out of that sometimes excruciating proximity to like the situation and your role in it and your sometimes uh, victimhood in it, like whether you see yourself as a victim erroneously or because you actually were like the victim of some horrendous things. It doesn't matter. It's just the tool isn't to like give you an answer of like validating, yeah, you see like that person's bad and you're good. It's like to just at least for me personally, when I was able to like look at things through the lens of archetypes and energies, and it wasn't just vibes, like it was, to be clear, I'd been studying astrology for like years before my sort of tower event at the beginning of this year. And sometimes I look back and I'm like, thank goodness I had some sort of like um way to just like, and maybe this is my unique version of coping, it was sort of like detaching, like removing myself from the equation enough to step back and be like, well, these were the energies at play. And if I'm really honest with the circumstances of my life and like the events leading up, it did allow me, without even searching in vain, a perspective that didn't rely on somebody just telling me, yep, you're right and they're wrong and they're shitty and you're not. And I mean, because while I appreciate, like we all want our cheerleader friends that have your back, like the part of me that understood like the severity of what happened and over the course of time and like the investment of time in the relationship of almost 2 decades, it was sort of like I already knew there was going to be nothing that was going to make it better. I mean, it was like a loss that was too big to really get some sort of finality or closure about, especially when everything that went down was like meant to leave me with like the opposite sense, like leave me in a state of feeling totally um worthless, like I had done something wrong, like being the object of projection, and like being told all these things about myself that it took me a while to unpack. And really, when I looked at it through the lens of these archetypes, think, wow, like as as depressing as this is to really see this way, I'm like, this person um was really projecting hard like these qualities that I actually tried in vain to make fit myself. That was the weird thing, is I tried to find a way to find truth in what this person said, because it at least would have, I don't know, it was like a quick and easy way to make it make sense. And so that's what's really interesting, is if it weren't for these archetypes and sort of like separating myself and like looking at the situation as like these characters embodying these certain archetypes, that's really what the value has been for me personally. And in that, it has been a tool for like self-understanding, and more importantly, and I've alluded to this in other videos, standing in that delicate balance of the duality that exists within all of us. Like I've always said that the person that denies their shadow side, um, is the most dangerous kind of person to be in a relationship with, of anyone, because in order to really be somebody who can stand in their truth and therefore work to build something meaningful and like with a solid foundation with somebody, we both have to be people operating within the reality of ourselves. Like nobody is all good or all bad. So the problem is, if you think that you're a good person and all you're doing is like telling people you're a good person, I'm here to tell you that there's like a monster just waiting to rear its ugly head. And in fact, it probably already does in certain pockets of your life. But you're so busy telling yourself that you're a good person that you've denied the existence of your entire shadow side, which we all have. I've said many times, all the archetypes have like sort of a shadow and a light, like expression. And so that's what I mean when I say your shadow side. Every archetype that you hold within you, that kind of, um, the variations and degrees of each archetype that kind of paint that very unique picture of you, there's going to be a shadow expression of all of those things that lurks beneath, and you confront it all the time. Anytime, like you're left to do the right thing when no one's looking, and you do it because that's what you've chosen. Like it's not a game of like, if someone sees me, I'm not good or bad based on like someone observing it. I'm good or bad because of a standard I've set for myself, and I choose to, whenever possible, be conscientious of the shadow side and the temptation, in every area of life. There's always temptation, and when you act like, if you've convinced yourself that that there's no shadow, it will probably run more of your life than you realize, actually. And so, you know, this moon card is, the symbolism on the card is very much asking you to look at that duality within yourself, and to stand in that sort of like navigate the winding road, that's kind of delicately like, that you kind of delicately travel in between like dark and light, wild and domesticated, and like conscious and subconscious, light and dark. It's there's no steadfast rule. Like if there is a steadfast rule, it's to always acknowledge there's a shadow side of me there at all times, just like there's a light. And so until you sit there and embrace and accept that shadow part, it will run amok in your life in ways that you might be the last to see. And so, the first thing you see on this card, you might have to look it up, the Moon card tarot. Well, you see these two animals. You see a coyote and you see a dog, and they're both howling at the moon. And the moon is illuminating essentially what is hidden, what's beneath the surface. And the coyote and the dog are howling because like it sort of at the discomfort of sort of having that illuminated. It's illuminating all that generally remains in the dark. And so the coyote represents our wild side, like our more like feral, um wild animal within, and then the dog is like the domesticated side. And they're both howling at the moon, though. Like neither one of those sides likes to have that illumination of what's hidden. And so then you've got these two towers in the card, which we'll get into more because they first appear in a major arcana card number 13, which is the death card. That's a very, very loaded card too. It's like very often misunderstood. But the first appearance that those two towers you see in this card make are in number 13, death. And these two towers, I've seen them treated many different ways as like good and evil, light, dark, conscious, subconscious. But it's less important like what exact words you use, and more so if you step back and look at the whole card as like a visual of duality, like between, you know, the coyote and the dog and the two towers and the winding road, delicately woven between those two things, with the moon illuminating all of it below. And so you see at the very bottom of the card, it's a crayfish, kind of sitting or coming out, emerging from the water, this pool of water where the path originates from. So you might look at yourself as that creature, you know, sort of emerging from the waters, having this path illuminated before you, and having this delicate path to weave in between, you know, in that duality of things. And you know, I think that we all like have gotten accustomed, especially in like kind of like a zero-sum world of sort of like all or nothing. It's hard to you almost feel like you have to like rewire yourself to see things as see the duality of things, because there is that fine line too, like uh the brain in sort of wanting to take the lazy way out wants a steadfast rule, right? We always want a steadfast rule. I would argue that in most cases in life there is no steadfast rule, but for like a few situations when it comes to like recognizing people's humanity, and like, you know, in all cases those who deny humanity to like a large group of people, like, well, there's a steadfast rule, you're definitely in the wrong, you know. It's like, aside from categorical things like that, most things are like case by case scenarios. And so the ego, looking for like a quick and easy route, wants to be like both sides, you know. The cheap and easy way to address duality is to be a both sideser. And like I've already talked about that in the shadow side of Libra, which again we all have the archetype. It just depends in what area of life that energy, that archetype governs. But duality is not the same as that. Like, duality is just as much of a recognition of the shadow forces within you as it is like you standing as some arbiter looking at, like, you know, a set of circumstances that involve other people and saying, oh well, both sides, you know, I am the scales of justice, both sides. It's like, okay. So this card, when it comes up, is your invitation to, number one, assess those around you, and like not to be paranoid. Like, you'll pretty much know like who these people are, and if that doesn't fit, well, then I would say assess the way you're looking at things. Ask yourself, is my mind sort of like playing tricks on me? Am I really standing in like am I really weaving that like windy road in between like the light and the dark and the domesticated and wild side? Am I doing that successfully? Like, am I really being honest with myself in the path that I'm walking? Like, have I acknowledged my own shadow? And you know, I said in one video that Carl Jung quote about I believe it's, until we make this subconscious conscious, or maybe the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives, and we will call it fate, something along those lines. And that's essentially like an echo of like what this card is essentially inviting you to do, is to use your intuition and let it guide you, and really get to know, like, siphon up that shadow within you in whatever way it tends to want to surface and accept it, like, because it's part of you. You're human, and so you need to introduce yourself, get to know it, and integrate it is the whole point. Like this card, um, I would personally use in terms of how the practical aspect of why it might come up in your life. If it's not a matter of people around you that you need to like sort of assess, is are things not what they seem with this person? If it's clearly sort of inviting you to look in the mirror, I think another keyword is like self integration of both sides of yourself, to become whole, because that is the path to healing. You're not going to heal until you have acknowledged that shadow within you and accepted and embraced it, because it's part of you. It is what it is. Like you can't have the light side without the dark side. That's just the nature of things. And so, um, a lot of people spend a lot of energy trying to like squash it down, and they think like, oh, I think these bad things, and like um, they mistake their thoughts for who they are. And I have to say, the good and bad news about your thoughts, depending on the nature that they take, you are not your thoughts, okay? You are actually the culmination of your behaviors, and that's also good and bad news for some people. Um, and that's a fact. Like I personally am relieved to not be my thoughts, because Lord, sometimes they are just like too fast, too loud, and too contradictory, and too much. And so sometimes you got to remind yourself, like, wait a minute, I'm not my thoughts. I'm not my thoughts. I am my series of behaviors in the world, and that's that. And so a lot of people, I think, spend a lot of time feeling bad about themselves, about their thoughts. And I'm just going to say that's a waste of time. Don't give yourself permission, starting now, to not define yourself by your thoughts, because you thinking a shadowy thought, like, that's why I say in therapy, like, one of the best pieces of advice I give to anyone like looking to embark on a therapy journey is, don't waste an ounce of yourself trying to sound like a good person. It's a waste of time. That's not what it's for. Your therapist, if you got one, that's like worth a damn, is going to see right through it. Like they're literally trained to do that. And furthermore, even if they're not, and you're just like a really good liar, well, the joke's on you, because you're literally spending a lot of money to like make things up to a person and like give them some other like hypothetical life to like assess and navigate with you, which is useless. That's like writing a story. You just like do creative writing if that's what you want to do. Um, so the point is, like, don't waste an ounce of your energy um, going around like insisting to yourself that you're a good person. It's like, just do good things. Like, don't do bad things, and like when you can do good things, and you have, that's a very common sense assessment in most cases, and it does require a degree of having met your shadow and gotten to know him or her, or they, or whatever, and accepted, embraced, and integrated it. Because when you do make the right choice, and when you do something that tends to be not the most convenient choice for you, um, you deserve to sit in the that good feeling that you have afterwards, knowing that you did make the right choice. You know what I mean? Like it's hard to love yourself for the good choices you make when they're done by a sense of compulsion. So in other words, it's hard to get the benefit of like doing an act of kindness or a good deed, when you know that you did it only because there was an audience. Like that's just like a recipe for resentment over time. But when you know that there was no one watching, and that you know you made the conscious decision to do this nice thing, to do this charitable thing, or to just do what was right, even though it inconvenienced you, it might have made you look bad, like where it's when you come in clean and sort of saying, okay, well, this is how it went down, and you sort of like sort of take the L and like do what's right, that's where the real rewards are, because you used your mind to do what was right and act in the 3D world, and therefore you don't need to convince yourself you're a good person over and over. Like, you prove it to yourself over and over by doing what you would attribute to be what a good person would do in that situation. And you're not always going to get it right, but it's the thought process and then assessing it and then doing your best given what it is that you know at that point. And that's all anyone can really ask of you. And so, I take this moon card and like introduce it, because not knowing what your experience with this Gemini full moon has been, I would guess that it's been very mercurial, because Gemini is ruled by Mercury. And so that's also like when I want to get into a more complicated, some of the more complicated astrology, when you look at like what it means for Gemini's ruling planet, Mercury, to be across the sky from it. So you've got the full moon occurring in Gemini, but when you look at the ruling planet of Gemini, well, it's in the other sign across the sky. It's in Sagittarius. So like by itself, Mercury in Gemini is like, there's nothing wrong with it. But here's Gemini, looking for its planet Mercury that rules this full moon. And it's like, oh, it's over there in the sister sign Sagittarius. So that's an uncomfortable position also. Like, not because Mercury in Sagittarius is necessarily like bad or something. It's just that you've got this culmination of this full moon energy and like the feelings and the cycles and like the maternal and like feminine and nurturing and all those things associated with the moon, and like its ruling planet is across the sky, far away from home. And so it's a lot of the combination of energies of everything I've described, including like the Mars being in Sagittarius and square being in the Saturn square, where Saturn's being in Pisces, and the very Piscean nature of the moon card itself, where you're kind of sifting through fantasy and illusion, like what's real in my life and what's not quite as it seems. Like, what sort of illusions have I been living under, and for what reason? Like, what am I trying to protect? Am I trying to protect myself? Am I trying to like lie to myself? Am I trying to lie to others? Like, what kind of mental contortions am I doing to avoid confronting that shadow that lurks within? So I say, don't be scared of the shadow, embrace it, integrate it, and it can never have power over you unless, of course, you've ignored it. And in that case, it's going to have tremendous power over you. Let's see. I have little notes over here. I don't want to leave anything out. I think I really... Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention lastly is, with this being a card of intuition and sort of that liminal space of Pisces, this card very much is an invitation to pay attention to your dreams. Now, a lot of people say that like, oh, I have dreams, but like I never remember them, and yeah, that's fine. But it's been my experience that when you make it your conscious effort to remember your dreams, even if it's just a matter of like saying to yourself, okay, I'm gonna remember, like if I dream tonight, I'm gonna remember it, you'd be surprised at what can happen. Just try it out. If you're one of those people that's like, oh, I don't remember my dreams, but I know I have them, just as an experiment, try before you go to sleep, just saying, okay, I'm gonna remember my dreams. I'm making the conscious effort, or even like say it in sort of like a statement, like an intention of please let my dreams guide me for like whatever I need to know that's hidden in my life. You could just say something like that. Just say it out into the universe. What guidance can I can I benefit from, to see things that are unseen and see what's hidden, so that I can have more clarity in how I navigate like my waking life. Just sort of declaring that as something important to you might have a way of making things become more vivid. And a lot of people suggest doing a dream journal, having some notebook by your bed, and before you really start getting your mind like going into your waking state, when you get up, like right when you first wake up, sort of just writing down, like without filtering it, like just writing down whatever, like symbols and like people, things that appeared. Don't try to make sense of it, and just like write, and then you don't even have to think about it anymore. Just get it down and then go back to it later or after a series of nights, and then see if there's any patterns that emerge. That's kind of fun, actually. It's like your own little psychoanalysis if you choose to accept the mission. But don't be scared. Don't be scared of yourself. Don't be scared of what's inside of you. I mean, it's inside of you. You are the captain. You are the master. Um, there's nothing in there that you can't handle, and there's nothing in there that makes you good or bad. It is. So become the master of these things, and they won't become the master of you. And I will leave off with sort of like a personal little anecdote about the value of dreams. And I will say that one of the things that I used to do, was very common between me and my ex-fiance, is it was like sort of a regular thing with us. We would share what we dreamed about, like, oh, I had crazy dreams. And we did that all the time, like, all through last year, the whole time we were together. And so we both did that. And like last year, what's crazy in hindsight when I look back is that I would regularly have dreams of him abandoning me. Now, and it wasn't like me dreaming of him cheating all year. Some of the dreams had that sort of flavor, but it was like more subtle. It was more like I dreamt we were at a party, and mind you, these were things I would share with him when we woke up, like, or when I saw him that day. I'd be like, oh, and it would be a joke. He'd be like, oh, are you mad at me? Are you mad at me because of your dream? And it would just be like this working sort of like joke, to where it would be less serious. But then some nights I'd be like, man, I was like really mad because, we were at this party, and, something happened. Like, I really needed you. And I couldn't find you anywhere. And, that would be the end of it. And we would both sort of have a laugh about it. And like, he'd like give me a hug and sort of be like, oh. And it was like both of us poking fun at our own like sort of little dream banter, right? But then last year, sometimes I'd be like, I really needed you, and I couldn't find you. And then like when I did find you, you were sitting there like goofing off with all these people, like there are all these girls that like I didn't even know. And I was like, where did they come from? And when I asked you, you were just like clowning me in front of everyone. You were like making me feel ridiculous, like. And so that would be the nature of the dreams last year. It was like incredible, because what's insane is that I shared all of these dreams like throughout last year. And what's most insane is that like he would laugh them off, and like come and like give me a hug and like say, oh, sort of like, oh, you're crazy. And I'd be like, yeah, right, like what is up with me? So it was like just another instance of the way that the gaslighting would happen. Like it would be taking a working like sort of ritual that we had of sharing our dreams. Him, and I'm just like, what was going on in this person's mind? Like he must have been like, oh shit. Like the whole time he's sleeping with his like assistant all year, and here I am just poking fun at myself. I'm like, man, I'm mad at you. Like in this dream, you were just like, you ditched me for like all these girls, and I just, there was an emergency and I needed you. And like, I'm like, what in the world would go on in your mind, like hearing the person you're actively betraying, like for months and months and months and months. and a year and more, like what in the world is going on to where not only are you like hearing this, but then you're like going about the normal ritual of just us like laughing about it and like sort of like making me feel silly. And I was a willing, I told myself I was silly too. I was like, yeah, that's crazy, right? And then of course, as like the year progressed and I started in my waking state, like having my suspicions and then confronting him, that was a different kind of gaslighting. That was like him actively denying and like then making me feel like, a burden for even bothering his busy schedule with such silly things. So that of course was in the waking state, and that's a little bit different than like what I'm suggesting about the moon card and your intuition and your dream state. I'm here to tell you your dream state has a lot to offer you, and sometimes just that story, I don't tell that story um a lot, actually. I'm not sure I've told it to anyone about my dreams. All I share maybe to one person, but he knows it. And so that's what's kind of wild is the power of your dreams might not become obvious until way after the stage that you were having them. And me just happening to be somebody who participated in a ritual, like I said, had a ritual of like us sharing. So I got probably just better and better over time with that ritual of recalling like very vivid details. And it's still like that to this day. It's like a gift and a curse, I will say. But don't sleep on your dreams. Like, no pun intended. Don't, if you've got something like kind of tugging at you on the inside and you're not quite sure what it is, maybe like kind of exploring the depths of yourself is new to you, start with your dreams, because there is some really good stuff in there. You'd be surprised at how useful unpacking them can be to answering questions that you have that you don't really know how to actually frame. So, all that being said, I do hope that the Gemini full moon and the mercurial chaos that it's like at least personally brought into my life, but it's all in my head. Like, I realize that. I'm looking forward to the end of the week where I will say the energy will get a little bit like lighter. So in the spirit of not letting one like raggedy day define the day after that and the day after that, I hope everyone has a smoother rest of their week and do take some action. Tomorrow's Mars Day. Remember, take some action. Like, put today behind you if it was sort of yucky and not your best, and make some plan to do something tomorrow. Make a plan of action. Tomorrow I'm gonna take a walk. Whenever it's sunny outside, I'm gonna take my lunch break and like take a little 10-minute walk. And then do whatever else you normally do on your lunch break, whatever it is. But go ahead and plan some little piece of action that's going to make you feel a little bit more grounded, and like you did something to connect with the outside and get your little dose of sunshine on your Mars day. So I hope everyone found this to be an informative little lesson on the moon card. And if you will excuse me, I will finish with my vegetable prep and maybe take a picture or something and share with you the final product. Till next time.